Welcome to On the Ballot with Ballotpedia, where we take a closer look at the week's top political stories. Ballotpedia connects people to politics by providing neutral, nonpartisan, and reliable information on our government, how it works, and where it's headed. We're here to give you the facts so you can form your own opinion. I'm Victoria Rose, and thanks for being with us. Today, we're excited to be unpacking our candidate connection surveys that have poured in from politicians running for office across the country. Joining me now are Doug Kreneisel.
Hello, Victoria.
Hi, Doug. And Abby Smith.
Hi, Victoria.
Great to have you both back with us. Every year, as you both and some of our listeners probably know, Ballotpedia goes about collecting surveys from folks seeking public office for races up and down the ballot. To give our readers a taste of what candidates are answering, I figured I would ask each of you to respond to one of my favorite questions on the survey. What was your first job? I think it's fun to hear where candidates are coming from as far as like what made them pursue public service and where did they start their professional careers. So, Doug, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. My first job was working at Taco John's. It's like the regional Taco Bell in the Midwest.
I didn't know they sold tacos in South Dakota.
Oh yeah, Taco John's is great. Especially the potato olays. They're like their seasoned tater tots. I never committed enough to work my way up to making the tacos themselves. So I was kind of stuck on dishwashing and drive-through duty, but it was a good time.
How about you, Abby?
I actually worked at my local public library, did that for 3 years in high school, and then came back the summer after my freshman year of college, and I loved that job. Close second to Ballotpedia.
Very nice. And I was a Maxinista. I worked at TJ Maxx for my first job in high school. So the surveys have been pouring in. We received more candidate surveys last week than any other week this year, with a whopping 573. As of this past Monday, we've processed 5,054 surveys in total, which puts us on pace to eclipse our total from 2020. Doug or Abby, what can our listeners learn about the politicians running for office by reading any given candidate connection survey?
All sorts of stuff, though it varies in terms of how much has been filled out because we only actually require candidates to submit a few questions. 3 of our questions are required. The rest they can answer at their own leisure. But regardless, each survey has a little bit about the candidate that isn't always the easiest to find when reading about them, in the newspaper, on social media, hearing about them in ads. We always make sure that politicians are pointing out the 3 main messages of their campaign, as well as what they are politically passionate about. So at the bare minimum, our readers will know that about their platform. But there's also a ton of other information readers can learn from these surveys, like the legacy the candidate hopes to leave, the last song that got stuck in their head, their thoughts on governor power and responsibility and independence of their states, what they love about their states, all sorts of things that, yeah, like I said, you're not really going to see them kind of going out of their way to talk about that on the campaign trail, but we offer them a little platform for you to kind of get to know them a little bit more personally and politically.
Yeah, it's definitely what makes our surveys unique. There's so much readers can learn in so many different directions candidates can take their responses. We actually had a lot of fun last week over Slack looking through some of those answers for a particular question, which was if you could be any fictional character, who would you want to be? Quick shout out to Kirsten Corral for putting together a spreadsheet for us to look into some of these. Any fictional characters receive more mentions than others?
Yeah, Superman took the lead. He had nearly twice as many submissions as the next closest fictional character with 140 mentions. Feels like a lot. And then 6 of the top 10 mentions were superheroes. So that was probably the biggest theme we saw. Second was Batman. Third was Wonder Woman. Fourth was Captain America. Fifth was Iron Man. You get the picture. But there were some other fun ones mixed in. Turns out the TV show Parks and Rec might have factored into people's decision to pursue public office because Leslie Knope was mentioned 9 times and Ron Swanson came up a few times as well. Others were James Bond and Sherlock Holmes, and then some characters from Harry Potter and To Kill a Mockingbird. Most surprising to me was that multiple candidates said Dora the Explorer.
That's interesting. Just out of curiosity, what would you all have said?
So 11 candidates actually had the same that I think I'd say. I'd go with Doctor Who. The ability to travel both in space and time sounds very intriguing.
I didn't check this in the survey. I'd be interested to see if anyone wrote this down, but I'd say mine would be probably Ash Ketchum, Pokemon, because Pokemon are really cool. And yeah, he's a little annoying, but he's tenacious. You got to give him that. He can really stick with it.
I'm learning so much about you guys. This is fun. Are there any nationally recognized candidates that filled out our survey? Just to give our listeners a sense of the scale and scope of how many candidates submitted, or if they wanted to learn more about these candidates specifically.
Definitely. I mean, we pulled a few names to shout out specifically, and we can run through them really quick. For example, both of the major party candidates in California's controller election, the Democrat and Republican, completed the survey. So that's Lanhee Chen, the Republican, and Malia Cohen, the Democrat. So if you really want to get a good idea of what people are saying in that race, we've got you covered.
And then Jamie McLeod Skinner, a Democrat running for Oregon's 5th congressional district, also filled out our survey. She defeated incumbent Kurt Schrader in the primary in May and faces Republican Lori Chavez de Remer. And then another one is Washington's 3rd congressional district. And this one, again, has both candidates responding. So that's Democrat Marie Perez and Republican Joe Kent. Republican incumbent Jamie Herrera Butler was defeated in the top 2 primary on August 2nd in that race. So both candidates in the general answered some of our fun questions. So you should definitely check those out. Apparently, Perez's first job was taking care of horses at the local stables, and Kent's first job was working at a Boy Scout camp.
We also got a response from Jerry Nadler, U.S. Representative in New York's 10th District, one of the longest tenured Democrats, and the chair of the Judiciary Committee as well.
And another Democrat, Mandela Barnes, is the current lieutenant governor of Wisconsin, who is running for U.S. Senate.
Maryland's Republican candidate for governor, Dan Cox, who's also currently a member of the state House of Delegates, filled out our survey. And last but not least, Carrie Lake, the Republican candidate for governor of Arizona.
A lot of interesting races. Any big battleground races we've got survey responses for?
Definitely. I mean, you already mentioned McLeod Skinner in the Oregon U.S. House race and Barnes in Wisconsin's U.S. Senate race. Those are both Democrats in battleground races that we've been watching this year. But we've also got plenty from Republicans in battleground races, too. In Colorado's 8th district, the Republican Barbara Kirkmeyer has submitted a survey. Now, that's a new district that was created after redistricting, and it's one of the most competitive districts in the country this year. And then in New York's 3rd district, which contains parts of northern Long Island and Queens, we received a response from George Santos, who's a Republican candidate there. As a note, Santos picked Captain America as his fictional character. Both of those races are open, meaning no incumbents filed to run, and whoever wins, Democrat or Republican, will be new to the House next year.
We also have a few races at the top of the ballot where we have 100% survey completion, meaning you can read all about all the major candidates running for that seat. This year, we've got more of those races than ever before, and you can check them out in the link in our bio. One of those races is the Iowa Secretary of State election. Both Republican Paul Pate and Democrat Joel Miller responded to our survey. Can we take a little bit of a closer look at that race between Pate and Miller?
Yeah, just kind of laying the field out for you. Pate is the incumbent. He won in 2018 with 52.7% of the vote. And then he kind of cruised through this year's primary. Miller defeated Eric Van Lanker in the Democratic primary this year with around 72% of the vote.
And taking a look at their survey responses, how did they each respond to the question, what areas of public policy are you personally passionate about?
Sure. So an excerpt from Pate's response said, elections, voting, helping Iowans with disabilities in the process, and providing Iowa's business communities with service it deserves. I'm also committed to providing address confidentiality for survivors of domestic violence, sexual abuse, assault, tracking, and stalking. We must also keep fighting against human trafficking. It is a form of modern-day slavery.
And then Miller said, quote, I am passionate about maintaining and improving our democracy by increasing the engagement of our citizens at all levels of government. Engagement begins with voter registration, i.e. giving citizens the option to vote if/when they choose to vote. I firmly believe the challenges governments face are not caused by too few citizens being involved. On the contrary, not enough citizens are involved.
Thank you both for coming on and kind of explaining our Candidate Connection survey. If our listeners want to hear more about it or read more responses, they can check out the link in our show notes. And they can even, from our Candidate Connection survey article, reach out to different candidates and ask them to fill out our survey. So we encourage you all to do that. Thank you both for coming on. This was a fun episode.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Hey everyone, this is Jeff Paulet, Ballotpedia's editor-in-chief. When we started Ballotpedia in 2006, our goal was to reach the few thousand political junkies a year with our balanced encyclopedic information. But thanks to the support of people like you, we now reach an audience of millions per year, from journalists and policymakers to everyday citizens researching their ballots. This is only possible because of donations from people like you, who share our belief that our democracy can become stronger by more voters knowing about the candidates and issues on their ballots. Check out the link in our show notes to learn more about how you can support Ballotpedia and learn more about how we put your tax-deductible gift to work.
It's Paulie Politics again over here. You want more footnote facts? Well, I've got footnote facts. Today's trivia is going to build off of last week's topic of red and blue and purple states, but this time it's for state-level government. And the kickoff comes from this trivia question. Which states have the longest current active trifecta streaks for Republicans and Democrats? You'll have to wait and see. Or, rather, hear. So, last episode I mentioned that whether a state is red or blue or purple depends partly on what elected office you look at. State-level governments sometimes have a colorful history in terms of partisanship, and probably the best way to look at that state's color is by looking at trifectas and triplexes. A trifecta is our way of describing states where the governorship and both chambers of the state legislature are controlled by one party, and then a triplex means a state's governor, attorney general, and secretary of state are the same party. You have a handful of states right now that have a governor of one party and a state legislature controlled by a different party, which, at least on the surface, suggests a purple state. An example of this is Maryland, where Larry Hogan is the Republican governor of an otherwise deep blue state. Then on the flip side, you have Kansas, where Laura Kelly is the Democratic governor of a solidly red state. But those are not the norm because right now we have 23 Republican trifectas, 21 of which are also Republican triplexes, and 14 Democratic trifectas, 13 of which are also Democratic triplexes. So if you find a state with a trifecta, it almost definitely has a triplex as well. But of course, how solidified the trifecta status is depends on the state, because there are a handful or so for each major party that has some measure of vulnerability. On the Republican side, the most likely trifecta to break is in Arizona, which has a real chance to completely shift to a Democratic trifecta, as Republicans have razor-thin majorities in the state House and Senate there, and the governor's race is supposed to be very competitive as well. Then the Democratic trifecta most likely to break is in Delaware. There's no gubernatorial election there this year, but Republicans might be able to take at least one state legislative chamber in that state. Now, what if we broke things up and looked more specifically at governors or state legislatures? Well, prior to the 2018 election, Republicans held a significant lead in governorships, and they still hold 28 gubernatorial offices compared to Democrats' 22, but 7 of the Democratic ones came from the 2018 elections, and then they captured Kentucky's governor's office in 2019. Now, Republicans did flip a governor's seat in 2018 in Alaska, but that was then held by Bill Walker, the only independent governor at the time. Though Republicans also did take the Montana governor's seat from Democrats in 2020 as well. So in all, 10 governor's offices have changed party hands in their last election. And by that measure, someone could argue that those are purple states when it comes to governor. But in terms of longest standing streaks, the longest Republican drought for governor is in Washington since 1985, and the longest Democratic drought is in South Dakota since 1979. With state legislatures, in recent years, it's been less common, though not unheard of, that a state senate has been held by one party, but the state house is held by the other. For example, in New York from 2011 to 2018, Republicans controlled the House, or Assembly as it is called in that state, while Democrats controlled the Senate. Then in Iowa from 2011 to 2016, Republicans had the House while Democrats had the Senate. But the parties also have some states where they've controlled both legislative chambers for a long time, like 20 or more years. For Republicans, this includes both Dakotas since 1995, and for Democrats, this includes Rhode Island and Massachusetts, both of them since 1956. With that, we return to today's trivia question, which was, which states had the longest current active trifecta streaks for Republicans and Democrats? And for Republicans, that is Utah since 1985, and for Democrats, that is Delaware since 2009. 100 points for each of those answers if you got them correct. No clever remarks from me, but really, when is that not the case? Oh, Paulie, personal put down over here. I'll have more trivia for you next week, but for now I must stop yapping and hand this back over to Victoria.
Thanks, Paul. In case you missed it, the Supreme Court just ended its October term and will be hearing cases again in just a few short weeks. That makes now the perfect time to subscribe to Ballotpedia's Robe and Gavel newsletter. With 8 cases down in October and 10 more on the way before November 10th, Robe and Gavel can help you catch up on the details of these cases and provide you with key summaries and takeaways once cases are heard. It's also a great resource for anyone interested in court vacancies, confirmations, and appointments, and more. To subscribe or just to check out our archive, go to ballotpedia.org and find the email updates tab, or use the link in our show notes to sign up for the Robe and Gavel newsletter or to check out our other newsletters. And that's all for this week's episode of On the Ballot. Thanks again to Doug, Abby, and Paul for coming on the show with me today. Make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, if you have any questions, comments, or love for Ballotpedia, feel free to send it to us at ontheballot@ballotpedia.org or on Twitter @Ballotpedia. I'm Victoria Rose, and thanks for listening.